A young man ages out of the system. A dusty envelope reveals he owns a ranch in Montana. What he finds there isn't just a home, but a legacy of secrets that will force him to choose between a fortune and the truth. If you've ever felt like your life was decided for you, or if you've ever had to fight for your own story, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories for people like us here. Now, let me tell you what happened on the day I stopped being a number. The day I aged out was my 18th birthday. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like an eviction notice from the only life I'd ever known. 18 years in the system, bouncing between foster homes that smelled of stale cigarettes and group homes that hummed with the quiet desperation of kids who'd learned too early that family was a word from a book. My last stop was the Northgate Youth Center, a brick building with windows that only opened 4 inches and a faint, institutional smell of bleach and boiled vegetables. Freedom, I'd been told, was waiting for me on the other side of the door. But standing there with my entire life packed into a single black garbage bag, freedom just felt like another word for being alone. Mrs. Gable, the center's director, gave me the standard speech. It was the same one she gave every kid on their way out, a mix of forced optimism and bureaucratic warnings about the real world. "You're a man now, Alex," she said, her voice tired but not unkind. "The world is yours. Just be smart about it." She handed me a thin manila envelope containing my birth certificate, my social security card, and a final check for $217, my severance package from the state of California. As I was about to turn and walk away, to disappear into the gray morning fog of Los Angeles, she stopped me. "Oh, wait, there's one more thing. This came for you, from a law firm." She held out a second envelope, this one different. It was thick, heavy, and made of a creamy, expensive-looking paper that had yellowed with age. My name, Alex Mercer, was written on the front in elegant looping cursive. There was no return address, just the embossed seal of a law firm I'd never heard of, Davison and Finch, LLP. I took it from her, my fingers tracing the raised letters. It felt foreign, important. "A law firm?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What for?" Mrs. Gable shrugged, her duty done. "No idea. They said to give it to you on your 18th birthday, not a day before, not a day after." She gave my shoulder a final, awkward pat. "Good luck, Alex." And just like that, I was standing on the curb, the door to Northgate closing behind me with a definitive metallic click, the sound of my past sealing itself shut. I stood there for a long time, the black garbage bag slung over my shoulder, the 2 envelopes clutched in my hand. One was my past, a collection of state-issued documents that proved I existed but told nothing of who I was. The other was a complete mystery. I walked to the nearest bus stop, the city waking up around me with a roar of traffic and sirens. I found a hard plastic bench and sat down, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I opened the state's envelope first. The $217 felt like both a fortune and an insult. It was enough for a few nights in a cheap motel, a few meals, but it wasn't enough to build a life. It was survival money, not living money. Then I turned to the other envelope. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside, there wasn't a lawsuit or a summons. There was a letter on the same heavy paper, a rusty, old-fashioned key, a stack of $100 bills bound with a rubber band, and a thick, folded document that looked like a deed. I unfolded the letter first. It was from a man named Arthur Davison. He introduced himself as the executor of my grandfather's estate. My grandfather, Samuel Mercer. The name was a ghost, a whisper from a life I barely remembered. I had a single faded memory of him, a tall man with kind eyes and hands that smelled like sawdust and pine needles, lifting me onto his shoulders, so I could see over a crowd at a county fair. I must have been 4, maybe 5. Then he was gone. My parents died in a car crash a year later, and my life in the system began. I'd always assumed he'd died, or simply hadn't wanted the burden of a grandson. The letter explained otherwise. Samuel had passed away only 6 months ago. He had left everything he owned to me, and what he owned, according to the legal document, was something called the Blackwood Creek Ranch, 1,200 acres in a place called Paradise Valley, Montana. My breath caught in my chest. Montana. I'd never been out of Southern California. I looked at the deed, my name printed clearly, Alex Mercer. I counted the cash, $5,000, more money than I'd ever held in my life. The letter from Mr. Davison was brief and professional. It stated that my grandfather's final instructions were clear. On my 18th birthday, I was to be given these items and informed of my inheritance. He included his phone number and advised me to call him to discuss the legal practicalities. But tucked behind his letter was another one, a smaller envelope sealed and brittle with age, with my name written on it in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. I knew instinctively this was from him, from Samuel. I opened it. The paper inside was thin, almost translucent. The words were written in a sprawling, messy script. The ink faded from black to a soft gray. It wasn't a long letter, but every word landed like a stone. "Alex," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are finally a man. I am sorry. I am sorry for not being there. I am sorry for the life you've had. There are things I could not explain, dangers I could not protect you from any other way. I had to let you go so they would think you were lost, forgotten, a ghost in the system. It was the only way to keep you safe." Safe? My entire life had been a landscape of uncertainty and neglect. I'd had my shoes stolen in one foster home and my arm broken in another. What part of that was safe? My hands were shaking now, a tremor that started in my fingers and radiated up my arms. I read on. "The world is not what it seems, son, and our family has a complicated history. I have left you the ranch. It's not much to look at right now, but it is yours. It is the one place on this earth that is truly yours. The money is for your bus ticket and to get you started. The key is for the front door. Go there. Go to Blackwood Creek. Don't sell it. Not yet. Not until you understand. The answers you need are there. This is your chance, Alex. Your chance to have a home. Don't trust anyone who tries to take it from you. Your story doesn't have to be the one they wrote for you. It starts now. Find the rest of the letters. Start in the workshop, the old toolbox, your grandmother's initials." I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. Grief, confusion, and a hot, searing anger swirled inside me. He hadn't abandoned me. He had hidden me. He had sacrificed his presence in my life for my safety. The narrative I had built around my own existence, the unwanted orphan, the forgotten grandson, crumbled in an instant. It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. The bus roared to a stop in front of me, its hydraulic doors hissing open. The driver looked at me, impatient. For a second, I was frozen. I had a choice. I could take the $5,000 and disappear. I could try to build a life right here in the city I knew, however hostile it was. It was the sensible option, the safe play. Or I could get on a bus and ride it 2 days into the heart of a state I'd only seen in movies, to a dilapidated ranch I didn't know, chasing the ghost of a man I barely remembered and the promise of a story I didn't understand. The driver honked. "You getting on or what, kid?" I looked at the letter in my hand, at the rusty key. My story doesn't have to be the one they wrote for you. I slung the garbage bag over my shoulder, climbed the steps, and paid the driver in cash for a one-way ticket to Livingston, Montana. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I watched the gray sprawl of Los Angeles fade into the distance. I wasn't running from something anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was running toward something. I didn't know what I would find at Blackwood Creek Ranch, but it was a beginning. It was mine. The journey was a 2-day blur of stale coffee, greasy diner food, and the endless, hypnotic ribbon of asphalt stretching across the American West. I watched the landscape transform from the concrete and palm trees of California through the stark, alien deserts of Nevada and Utah until finally the world opened up into the vast, rolling plains and distant, snow-capped mountains of Montana. It was like driving into a postcard. The sky was bigger here, a piercing, impossible blue that made the city sky look like a dirty window. I spent most of the ride staring out that window, the grandfather's letter clutched in my hand, my mind a whirlwind of questions. What dangers had he been protecting me from? Who were they? And what was waiting for me in a dusty workshop toolbox? I called the lawyer, Mr. Davison, from a payphone at a rest stop in Idaho. His voice was exactly as I'd imagined, old, calm, and measured. Mr. Mercer, Alex, I'm glad you called. I trust you received the package. I did, I said, my own voice sounding young and unsteady. I'm on my way to Montana now. There was a pause on the line. Good, he said, and I could hear a faint hint of something like relief in his tone. That's what your grandfather would have wanted. Listen, the property taxes are paid up for the next year. The utilities are off, but the accounts are still open. I've taken the liberty of arranging for them to be turned back on. They should be active by the time you arrive. There are complexities to your grandfather's estate, Alex. He was a very private man. When you get settled, we should talk more. There are other interested parties. Interested parties? Who? A development corporation, he said, his voice tightening slightly. They've been trying to acquire the land for years. Your grandfather always refused. They will likely contact you. My advice for now is to listen to what your grandfather said in his letter. Don't make any decisions until you understand the full picture. I hung up the phone with a new knot of anxiety in my stomach. A development corporation. It sounded ominous, another faceless system trying to dictate my life. The bus finally deposited me in Livingston, a small, rugged town nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. It was late afternoon, and the air was crisp and smelled of pine and cold river water. It was a world away from the smog and heat of L.A. Following the lawyer's emailed instructions, I found a local taxi service, a single dusty pickup truck driven by a man with a weathered face and a friendly smile. Where to, son? He asked, tipping his cowboy hat. Blackwood Creek Ranch, I said, feeling the name in my mouth for the first time. The driver's eyes widened slightly. Samuel's old place? Haven't been out that way in years. You family? His grandson, I said. The man nodded slowly, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. He was a good man, kept to himself, but a good man. Sad to hear he passed. Well, hop in. It's a ways out. The drive was another 20 minutes, leaving the town behind and heading down a winding dirt road that followed the curves of a rushing silver river. The mountains loomed. Closer, their peaks painted gold by the setting sun. We passed sprawling ranches with neat white fences and herds of cattle, but then the road grew rougher, more overgrown. Finally, the driver slowed the truck and pointed. There she is. Through a stand of skeletal aspen trees, I saw it. The entrance to my inheritance. A sagging wooden archway with the words Blackwood Creek Ranch barely visible, carved into the weathered timber. Beyond it, a long, rutted driveway led to a dark shape that I presumed was the house. The driver dropped me and my garbage bag at the gate. Power company was out here yesterday, he said. Should be good to go. You need anything, you call us. Folks out here look after each other. He handed me a business card and drove off, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust and the profound, overwhelming silence of the countryside. I stood before the gate, my heart pounding. This was it. The air was getting colder as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the gate open. It groaned in protest, the sound unnervously loud in the quiet. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. The house was worse than I had imagined. It was a classic two-story ranch house, but the paint was peeling in long strips. One of the porch steps was broken and the windows were dark and coated in grime. A large, dilapidated barn stood off to the side, its roof sagging in the middle. The whole place looked abandoned, haunted by neglect. It looked like the physical embodiment of my childhood. For a moment, my resolve wavered. This wasn't a home. It was a ruin. I could turn around, walk back to the main road, and hitch a ride to anywhere else. But then I thought of the letter. This is your chance. I walked up the creaking porch steps, avoiding the broken one, and stood before the front door. The paint was faded, but I could just make out a small carved bird on the wood. A wren, maybe. I pulled the rusty key from my pocket. It felt heavy, real. I slid it into the lock. It resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse. I put my shoulder into it, turned, and with a loud, grating clank, the lock gave way. I pushed the door open and was met with the smell of dust, cold air, and old memories. The inside of the house was a time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the air was heavy and still. Moonlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating furniture shrouded in white sheets, like a room full of ghosts. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. I flicked a light switch by the door, not expecting anything to happen, but to my surprise, a single bare bulb flickered to life in the entryway, casting a weak yellow glow over the scene. Mr. Davison had been true to his word. I dropped my garbage bag on the floor and began to explore, moving slowly from room to room. The living room had a massive stone fireplace, a threadbare sofa, and bookshelves, filled with dusty volumes. The kitchen was small and dated, with pale yellow cabinets and a linoleum floor that was cracked and peeling. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly my grandfather's. A simple wooden bed frame, a tall dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. The other room was smaller. It contained a child's bed, a small wooden desk, and a shelf of faded children's books. On the wall, faint outlines showed where posters or pictures had once been hung. My room. This had been my room. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I had lived here. I had a life here before it was all erased. I sat down on the edge of the small bed, the springs groaning in protest. I ran my hand over the dusty wooden headboard. I tried to remember, to grasp at any wisp of a memory of this place, but there was nothing. It was a blank slate, a history that belonged to a different version of me. The anger from before returned, a slow burn in my chest. All of this, a home, a family, a childhood, had been taken from me, for my own good. It felt like a cruel joke. After a few minutes, I pushed the feeling down. Anger wouldn't help me now. I had a task. Find the rest of the letters, start in the workshop, the old toolbox. I made my way back downstairs and out the back door. The workshop was a small shed-like building attached to the side of the barn. The door was unlocked. Inside, the smell of sawdust and oil was still strong, even after all these years. Tools hung in neat rows on the walls, outlines in the dust showing where each one belonged. Workbenches were cluttered with half-finished projects and jars of screws and nails. It was the space of a man who built things, who fixed things. In the corner, just as the letter had described, was a large, red, metal toolbox. It was old and flecked with rust, but sturdy. I knelt in front of it and looked for my grandmother's initials. There, on the side, almost invisible under the grime, were two small, delicately painted letters. E.M. Eleanor Mercer. I didn't even know her name until this moment. My grandmother. The toolbox wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid, a creak of metal echoing in the small space. The top tray was filled with wrenches and screwdrivers, all coated in a thin film of oil. I lifted the tray out. And there, nestled at the bottom of the box on a bed of clean rags, was a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. It was made of a dark, polished wood, with intricate carvings of vines and leaves on the lid. And on top of the box was another envelope, identical to the one I'd received from my grandfather. My hands shook as I picked it up. This was it, the next piece of the puzzle. I took the wooden box and the letter back to the house, to the kitchen. I wiped down the small table with the sleeve of my jacket and sat. The single bulb overhead cast long shadows as I broke the seal on the second letter. The handwriting was the same, but this time it felt more urgent, more strained. Alex, it read, if you found this, you made it. I knew you had my strength in you. I'm glad you're in the workshop. I wanted you to see it. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could make sense of the world by taking it apart and putting it back together. I hope it can be that for you too. Now, for the harder truths. Our family didn't come into money the easy way. My father, your great-grandfather, made his fortune back east in construction. But he had a partner, a man named Cyrus Thorne. They built an empire together, but Thorne was ruthless. He cut corners, he broke laws, he hurt people. My father wanted out, but you don't just walk away from a man like that. Cyrus Thorne. The name sent a chill down my spine. The lawyer had mentioned a development corporation. Was there a connection? I kept reading, my eyes scanning the page frantically. There was a disagreement, a big one. My father threatened to expose Thorne. A week later, he was dead. An accident at a construction site. Nothing was ever proven. I was just a boy, but I knew. I always knew. I took my inheritance and I ran. I came out here to Montana to disappear, to build a life where the shadow of Cyrus Thorne couldn't reach. I met your grandmother, Eleanor, and for a while we were happy. We had your father. We built this ranch with our own hands. But shadows are long, Alex, and they follow you. The letter was becoming harder to read. The ink was smudged in places as if from a water droplet or a tear. Your father, he was like me. He couldn't let it go. When you were born, he started digging back into the past. He wanted justice for my father. He made contact with Thorne's son, a man named Marcus, hoping he would be different. He wasn't. Your father found something, some proof of what Cyrus had done all those years ago. He told me he had it, that he was going to the authorities. He and your mother left you with me for the weekend while they went to the city to meet with a reporter. My breath hitched. I could feel where this was going. The car crash. It wasn't an accident. They never made it. A drunk driver, the police report said, on a deserted stretch of highway. The police found no evidence of the documents your father claimed to have, and Marcus Thorne sent me his condolences. It was a message, Alex, a warning. They knew about you. They knew I was all you had left. I was terrified they would come for you next. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made you disappear. I put you in the system, a nameless, faceless orphan in a city of millions. I paid people to lose your records, to shuffle your file. I knew it would be a hard life, but I prayed it would be a life. I watched you from a distance through reports from a private investigator I could barely afford. Every birthday, every new foster home. It broke my heart 1,000 times over. But you were alive, and you were safe. Forgive me. I dropped the letter on the table. The room was spinning. My parents hadn't died in a random accident. They had been murdered for trying to tell the truth. And my grandfather had spent the rest of his life, and all of his money, hiding me from their killers. The weight of it was crushing. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the pain. It all clicked into place, forming a picture so monstrous I could barely look at it. The quiet, empty house no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a fortress, a sanctuary built by a man who had given up everything to protect the last piece of his family. I looked at the small wooden box on the table. It was the only thing left. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no more letters. Instead, it was filled with old photographs, a child's drawings, and a small, leather-bound journal. I picked up a photo. It showed a younger version of my grandfather, his arm around a smiling woman with kind eyes, Eleanor, and in front of them stood a young man and woman holding a baby, my parents and me. We were standing on the porch of this very house. The paint was fresh, the steps were whole, and there was a wreath on the door. We were a family. We were happy. I cried then, not for the boy who was lost in the system, but for the man who lost everything, for the stolen years, for the family in the photograph. I cried until there were no tears left. Sitting alone in the dusty kitchen of a house I was only just beginning to understand. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a battlefield, and the war wasn't over. The next morning I woke up on the dusty sofa in the living room, a stiff neck and a heavy heart, my only companions. The sun was streaming through the grimy windows, illuminating the room in a way that made it feel less like a tomb and more like a place waiting to be woken up. The grief from the night before had settled into something harder, something more focused, a cold, quiet anger. My entire life had been shaped by a lie, a violent secret kept by a man named Thorne. And now his corporation wanted to buy this land, the last piece of my family, the last monument to their sacrifice. The thought was sickening. I spent the morning exploring the house in the daylight. I opened all the windows, letting the fresh, cold mountain air chase out the stale smell of dust and disuse. I pulled the sheets off the furniture, revealing sturdy, handmade pieces that were worn but solid. This place had good bones. It had been loved once, and it could be loved again. In my grandfather's bedroom, I found his clothes still hanging in the closet, flannel shirts and worn denim jeans. In a drawer of his nightstand, I found the leather-bound journal from the wooden box. I sat on his bed and opened it. It was his. The entries were sporadic, spanning years. The early ones were about building the ranch, the birth of my father, his love for my grandmother. They were filled with hope. The later entries were darker. He wrote about my father's obsession with the past, his fear of what he might uncover, and then the last entry, dated the day after my parents' death. They are gone. He killed them, just like he killed my father. He sent flowers to the funeral. The devil sent flowers. Now there is only the boy. There is only Alex. I cannot protect him here. They will watch me. They will wait. I have to send him away. I have to become a ghost so that he can become one too. May God forgive me for what I am about to do. May Alex, one day, forgive me. That was the last entry. He had never written in it again. He had spent the next 13 years in silence, a self-imposed prison of grief and fear. I closed the journal, the leather cool against my skin. Forgiveness? There was nothing to forgive. He had done what he had to do. He had saved my life. My focus shifted. The letter had said the answers were here. Plural. I had found the letters in the toolbox, but it didn't feel like the end. His first letter had been so specific. Find the rest of the letters. The second letter had laid out the history, but it hadn't told me what to do now. It hadn't explained the full danger or why this specific piece of land was so important. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. It was a way to keep my hands busy, to stop my mind from spinning. I swept the floors, washed the windows, scrubbed the kitchen until the yellow cabinets gleamed. With every layer of grime I removed, the house felt more and more like mine. I was claiming it, not just legally, but emotionally. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, but the house was breathing again. It was then that I saw the truck coming up the long driveway. It wasn't a dusty pickup like the taxi. This was a sleek, black luxury SUV, the kind that looked ridiculously out of place against the rugged landscape. It crunched to a stop, and a man in a tailored suit and polished shoes got out. He looked around at the property, a faint, dismissive smile on his face. He walked up to the porch, his expensive shoes carefully avoiding the dirtiest spots. He looked to be in his late 40s with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Alex Mercer?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. I stood in the open doorway, my arms crossed. I didn't need to ask who he was. I knew. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, extending a hand. "I'm with Viridian Development. My condolences on your grandfather's passing. He was a stubborn man." I ignored his hand. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Thorne, the son of the man who killed my great-grandfather, the man who had my parents murdered. He was standing on my porch. My blood ran cold. I had to fight every instinct to scream, to lash out. Instead, I thought of my grandfather. I thought of his patience, his sacrifice. I needed to be smart. I needed to be calm. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. Thorne's smile didn't falter. "I'm here to make you an offer, Alex, a life-changing one. We've been interested in this parcel for a very long time. It's the last piece we need to complete our new luxury resort project. We're prepared to offer you $3 million for the land and the house as is." $3 million. The number hung in the air, seeming to suck all the oxygen out of it. 3 million. It was an impossible, fantastical sum. Enough money to go anywhere, do anything. Enough to never have to worry about anything ever again. It was the easy way out, the ultimate escape. For a dizzying second, I saw it. A new life, far from here, with no ghosts and no secrets. A life of comfort and ease. But then I looked past him, at the mountains my grandfather had loved. I looked at the house my family had built. I thought of the photograph of us on this very porch. Selling this land wouldn't just be a transaction. It would be a betrayal. It would be letting him win. "The place isn't for sale," I said. Thorne's smile finally tightened. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Alex, let's be realistic. You're 18 years old. You've got nothing but the clothes on your back. This place is a ruin. It would take a fortune to make it livable. I'm offering you a fortune right now. Take the money. Start a new life. Forget this place ever existed. It's the smart move." "I said it's not for sale," I repeated, my voice harder this time. He let out a sigh, a theatrical display of disappointment. "Your grandfather was an idealist. He was stuck in the past. Don't make the same mistake. This land holds nothing but bad memories. Let it go." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek business card and a thick folder. "This is the official offer. Look it over. 3 million is our starting point. We can be flexible for a quick, clean sale. Think about it, Alex. Really think about what that money could do for you. It's more than your family ever had." The casual cruelty of that last line was like a slap in the face. He was taunting me with the life my parents never got to live. He placed the folder on the porch railing. "I'll be in touch," he said, then turned and walked back to his ridiculous SUV, leaving me standing in the doorway with his poison offer. I watched him drive away, a plume of dust in his wake, and I felt a resolve harden within me like steel. He thought this was about money. He thought I was a scared kid he could buy off. He didn't understand. This was never about the money. This was about justice. This was about home. I left the folder on the railing, unopened. I wasn't going to let his world, his numbers, his threats even enter my house. I had to find the rest of the story. I had to know why this specific land was so important, that Thorne was willing to pay millions for it. There had to be more. I went back to my grandfather's last letter, the one from the toolbox. I read it again, slowly, searching for a clue I had missed. And then I saw it. A single sentence I had skimmed over in my grief. I came out here to Montana to disappear, to build a life where the shadow of Cyrus Thorne couldn't reach. I bought this land with the last of my money. I made sure it was ironclad. He taught me that much, at least. The only thing you can truly own is the ground beneath your feet. Ironclad. The ground beneath your feet. It wasn't just a turn of phrase, it was a clue. The answer wasn't in the house. It was in the land itself. I thought about the ranch. 1,200 acres, a mix of pasture, forest, and rocky hills, with Blackwood Creek cutting right through the middle of it. Why this piece of land? I needed a map. I searched the house, pulling out drawers, looking through the bookshelves. Finally, in a roll-top desk in a small study I'd overlooked, I found it. It was a large, detailed topographical map of the property, rolled up and secured with a rubber band. I spread it out on the living room floor. It was hand-drawn, with notes in my grandfather's familiar script marking fence lines, springs, and old game trails. But there was something else. In the far northern corner of the property, in a rugged, hilly area marked the high country, there was a small red X drawn on the map. Next to it were two words, the witness. The witness. The words echoed in my mind, a cryptic signpost pointing me deeper into the mystery. This was it. This had to be the next step. The high country was the most remote part of the ranch, a section of jagged hills and dense pine forest that, according to the map, was nearly inaccessible. There were no roads leading to it, only a faint dotted line indicating an old, overgrown trail. I knew I had to go. I spent the evening preparing. I found a sturdy old backpack in a closet, along with a canteen and a compass. In the kitchen, I packed what little food I had, some crackers and canned beans from a dusty pantry. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The whole time I could feel Marcus Thorne's offer, sitting on the porch railing like a venomous snake, a constant temptation. $3 million. The number was a siren song, promising an end to all my struggles. I was tired. I was scared. Part of me screamed to just take the money and run, to let the ghosts of the past stay buried. But every time I thought of my grandfather's face in that photograph, of his last journal entry, I knew I couldn't. Running was what he had done. It was what he had forced me to do. It was time to stop running. It was time to stand and fight. But what was I fighting for? I still didn't know. I fell asleep that night with the map spread on the floor beside me, the red X glowing in the moonlight. The next morning I was up before dawn. The air was bitingly cold, and a low mist hung over the valley. I dressed in a pair of my grandfather's old jeans and a flannel shirt that hung loosely on my frame. They smelled faintly of him, of wood smoke and earth. It was strangely comforting. I left Thorne's folder on the porch railing, a silent act of defiance. I grabbed the backpack, filled the canteen from the kitchen tap, and set out, locking the door of my house behind me. The trail to the high country started behind the barn. At first, it was easy enough to follow, a faint path winding through open pasture land. But soon, the land began to climb, and the path disappeared into a thick forest of lodgepole pine. The going was tough. I had to push through dense undergrowth, climb over fallen logs, and navigate steep, rocky inclines. The city had made me soft. Every muscle in my body ached. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the crunch of my boots on pine needles. A few hours in, I stopped to rest, leaning against a massive ponderosa pine. I was exhausted, lost, and starting to feel foolish. What was I even looking for? a red X on a hand-drawn map. It was insane. I was a city kid chasing a ghost story in the middle of the Montana wilderness. Maybe Thorne was right. Maybe I should just take the money. Right now, $3 million sounded a lot better than getting eaten by a bear. It's at moments like this, isn't it? When you're at your lowest, when the path forward seems impossible, that you really find out who you are. The easy road is right there, calling to you. And every part of you, every tired muscle, and every scared thought wants to take it. Have you ever been there? Standing at a crossroads where one path is smooth and paved with gold, and the other is a rocky uphill climb into the unknown. What did you do? Let me know in the comments. I think we all have a story like that. For me, sitting there in that forest, I realized something. Taking the money wasn't just the easy road. It was Thorne's road. It was him winning. It was him erasing my family, my history, for a second time. My grandfather didn't raise me, but he left me this one final lesson. He left me a choice. And I would be damned if I let Marcus Thorne make it for me. Now, let's get back to the woods. I took a long drink from my canteen, pushed myself to my feet, and checked the compass. I aligned it with the map. The X was northwest. I pushed on, my fatigue replaced by a new grim determination. After another hour of hard climbing, the forest began to thin. I emerged onto a rocky ridge that offered a breathtaking view of the entire valley. I could see my ranch, a tiny speck in the distance. The world felt huge, and I felt incredibly small. But I also felt a sense of ownership I'd never felt before. All of this, as far as I could see, was mine. I followed the ridgeline, and then I saw it. It wasn't a cave or a hidden bunker. It was a tree. But it was unlike any other tree in the forest. It was an ancient, gnarled juniper clinging to the edge of a cliff. Its trunk was thick and twisted, sculpted by centuries of wind and snow. It looked like a silent old sentinel guarding the valley below. The witness. I walked towards it, my heart hammering. This was the place. I circled the tree, looking for something, anything. A loose rock, a carving, a hidden marker. There was nothing, just the tree and the rock and the endless sky. Disappointment washed over me. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was it just a name my grandfather had given a landmark? I slumped down at the base of the tree, defeated. My hand rested on the rocky ground, and my fingers brushed against something that wasn't rock. It was metal. I dug at the dirt and pine needles, my fingers raw. I unearthed a small, flat metal ring, almost invisible against the ground. It was a handle. Adrenaline shot through me. I gripped the ring with both hands and pulled. It was heavy, but it moved. With a grating sound of stone on stone, a large, flat section of rock lifted up, revealing a dark, square hole in the ground. It was a compartment lined with metal like a hidden safe. And inside, protected from the elements in a waterproof oilskin bag, was one last package. It was heavy. I lifted it out, my hands trembling. This was the heart of it all, the final secret of Blackwood Creek Ranch. I untied the leather cord and opened the bag. Inside was not a letter. It was a thick legal binder, and on the cover, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "The Thorne Legacy, Evidence." And beneath that, a small handheld digital audio recorder. I took the binder and the recorder and sat with my back against the ancient juniper. The wind whistled around me, a lonely, high-pitched sound. I opened the binder. The first page was a signed, notarized affidavit from my father, dated the day before he died. It was his testimony. It detailed his investigation, his conversations with Marcus Thorne, and the evidence he had uncovered. It was the document he was taking to the reporter. The pages that followed were the evidence itself. Photocopies of old bank records showing illegal money transfers. Witness statements from former employees of Cyrus Thorne's company, detailing safety violations he had covered up. And the crown jewel, the original signed confession of a foreman who admitted to sabotaging the construction site where my great-grandfather had died, all on Cyrus Thorne's orders. My father had found it. He had found the proof that had been buried for 50 years. But there was more. The binder also contained geological surveys and mineral rights documents for this specific piece of land, Blackwood Creek Ranch. My grandfather hadn't just bought a remote piece of property. He had bought the one piece of land the Thornes could never, ever own. According to the documents, when my great-grandfather and Cyrus Thorne split their assets, my great-grandfather had cleverly retained the sole mineral rights to this one, seemingly worthless parcel of land in Montana. He had seen it as a nest egg, a final, in case of emergency, asset, and the geological surveys my father had commissioned showed why. The land, specifically the high country where I was sitting on top of one of the richest, most accessible lithium deposits in North America. My stomach dropped. It was never about the view. It was never about a luxury resort. It was about what was under the ground. Lithium. The white gold of the 21st century, essential for batteries, for electric cars, for the entire tech industry. This ranch wasn't worth $3 million. It was worth billions. Thorne wasn't trying to buy a ranch. He was trying to reclaim the one part of his family's empire that had slipped through their fingers. He was trying to finish what his father had started, erasing my family and taking everything we had. Finally, I picked up the audio recorder. I pressed play. A voice filled the silence. It was my father's voice. I had no memory of it, but I knew it instantly. It was young, strong, and full of conviction. "This is Daniel Mercer. If you're listening to this, it means I didn't make it. It means Marcus Thorne is exactly like his father. I have the evidence, the proof of what they did to my father and God knows who else. But I think I finally understand why he's so desperate. It's the land, the Montana property. He knows what's under it. He's been trying to get the mineral rights for years, but my father's will was ironclad. They pass to his direct heir, and only upon their death can they be sold. He can't get to it as long as my father is alive. As long as I am alive." There was a pause. I could hear him take a shaky breath. "I'm leaving this recording, and the evidence, with my father. He knows a place to hide it, a place on the land itself, a place that will stand as a witness. If anything happens to me, he will give it to my son, Alex, when he is old enough to understand. Alex, if you're hearing this, I'm so sorry. I wanted to build you a better world, a world where men like the Thornes don't win. I failed, but the fight isn't over. This land is your birthright. It's your shield. He can't touch it as long as it's yours. Don't let him scare you. Don't let him buy you. The truth is in your hands now. Be brave, my son. I love you." The recording ended. The only sound was the wind. I sat there, on top of a mountain of secrets, holding my father's voice in my hand. He hadn't failed. He had passed the torch. He and my grandfather had created the perfect fortress. They had used the law, the land itself, as a weapon and a shield. The ranch wasn't just a home. It was a safe deposit box, and I was the only one with the key. The choice was clear now. It wasn't about money versus sentiment. It was about justice versus corruption. It was about finishing my father's fight. I packed the binder and the recorder carefully back into the bag. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. I stood up and looked out over my valley, my land, my home. Marcus Thorne had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought I was an orphan with a price tag. He didn't know I was a son. He didn't know I was a grandson. He didn't know I was a Mercer, and we don't sell, we fight. The walk back down the mountain was different. The exhaustion was still there, a deep ache in my bones, but it was overshadowed by a sense of purpose, so sharp and clear it was almost painful. Every step on the rocky soil felt significant. This wasn't just dirt and trees. It was my armor. I got back to the house well after dark. guided by the single light I'd left on in the kitchen window. It looked like a beacon. The folder from Thorne was still on the porch railing, a dark rectangle in the moonlight. I picked it up, walked into the kitchen, and without opening it, I fed it page by page into the old wood-burning stove I had cleaned out earlier. I struck a match and watched the slick, corporate promises turn to ash. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was my declaration of war. The next day, I called Mr. Davison. I didn't tell him everything over the phone, just that I had found some documents my grandfather had left for me, and that I was not, under any circumstances, selling the ranch. "I'm glad to hear it, Alex," he said, his voice laced with a profound sense of relief. "I had a feeling you'd see things clearly. Your grandfather always said you had a strong moral compass, even as a little boy." His words hit me harder than any of Thorne's threats. My grandfather had believed in me, even when he couldn't be with me. "Mr. Thorne paid me a visit," I said, my voice steady. "He offered me $3 million. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "And you refused?" "I told him it wasn't for sale." "Alex," he said, his voice now serious and urgent, "you need to be careful. These are not people who take no for an answer. The evidence you found, it could be very dangerous for you." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not just refusing to sell. I'm going to finish what my father started." There was a long silence. I could hear the faint hum of his office, a world away. When he spoke again, his voice was different. The calm lawyer was gone, replaced by something else, something fiercely protective. "Okay, son, okay. Here's what we're going to do. Don't talk to anyone. Don't let anyone on the property. I'm getting on a plane. I'll be in Livingston tomorrow morning. We're going to handle this the right way, the legal way. Your father and grandfather gave you the shield. Now we're going to use it to forge a sword." The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I locked the doors, kept the curtains drawn, and sat with the evidence binder on the kitchen table. I read every page, memorized every detail. I listened to my father's voice on the recorder over and over again, letting his strength become mine. This was my legacy, not the billions under the ground, but this fight for the truth. True to his word, Mr. Davison arrived the next morning. He wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured a frail, elderly man, but the man who stepped out of the rental car was solid in his late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the quiet confidence of someone who had been in 1,000 battles and won most of them. He shook my hand firmly. "Alex, it's good to finally meet you in person. Arthur Davison." He looked around at the house, a small, sad smile on his face. "The last time I was here, you were chasing butterflies in that field over there." He had known them. He had been my grandfather's friend. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had cried over the first letter, and I laid everything out. The binder, the recorder. I told him the whole story from the moment I aged out of the system to standing on the mountain. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Your father was a brilliant man," he said finally, "and a brave one. He put together an airtight case. This confession." He tapped the document. "This is enough to reopen the investigation into your great-grandfather's death. And with the context of what happened to your parents, it paints a very clear picture of the Thorne family's methods." "And the lithium?" I asked. "That's the motive," he said, nodding. "The thing that makes them desperate. This land is the linchpin to their entire future. Without it, their expansion plans are dead in the water. They've built a house of cards on the assumption they could eventually acquire it." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We don't go to the press. Not yet," he said decisively. "That was your father's mistake. He showed his hand too early. We use this leverage strategically. First, we secure you. We'll place the original evidence in a secure bank vault and make multiple verified copies. We'll draft a dead man's switch, an agreement that if anything happens to you, this evidence is automatically released to the Department of Justice and every major news outlet in the country. We will personally deliver a copy of that agreement to Marcus Thorne. We let him know that you are no longer a vulnerable target. You are a threat. Harming you would be the end of his entire world. His plan was brilliant. It wasn't about revenge. It was about checkmate. It was using their own ruthless logic against them. And then? I asked. Then, Mr. Davison said, a grim smile touching his lips, you live your life. You build this ranch back up. You honor the legacy your family left you. You become so rooted in this community that you are impossible to move. Thorne will have a choice. Try to fight a battle he can no longer win and risk losing everything, or cut his losses and walk away, leaving $1 billion treasure under the feet of the one family he could never break. The choice wasn't mine anymore, it was his. And for the first time I felt the balance of power shift. The fear that had been my constant companion for days began to recede, replaced by a profound, grounding sense of peace. The following weeks were a flurry of legal activity. We did exactly as Mr. Davison had planned. The evidence was secured, the documents were drafted, and one crisp autumn afternoon, Arthur Davison, my family's lawyer and friend, walked into the sleek corporate offices of Viridian Development and served Marcus Thorne with a notice that effectively ended his war against my family. I wasn't there, but Mr. Davison told me Thorne had gone pale, that he had looked at the documents and understood instantly that he had lost. There were no more visits, no more phone calls, no more offers, just silence. The beast had retreated back into its cave, and I was left with my inheritance. 1,000 acres of quiet, a run-down house, and a future that was entirely, terrifyingly my own. Rebuilding the ranch was the hardest work I'd ever done. I started small. I fixed the porch step, I painted the front door, I learned how to repair fences from an old rancher down the road, a man named Hank who had known my grandfather. He'd show up with his tools and a thermos of coffee and work alongside me, telling me stories about Samuel. Your granddad was a stubborn old goat, he'd say with a grin, but he loved this land, said it was the only honest thing in the world. Slowly, piece by piece, I brought the place back to life. I bought a few head of cattle with a small loan Mr. Davison helped me secure against the land's value, not its mineral value, but its agricultural value. I was a rancher. The locals, who had at first been wary of the stranger who had inherited the old Mercer place, began to accept me. They saw me at the feed store, at the local diner. They saw the work I was putting in. I wasn't some rich kid. I was one of them, fighting to make a go of it. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found my community. One evening, a year after I first arrived, I was sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and pink. The house was warm behind me, the lights on. The barn roof was patched. The fences were straight. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had built it. Mr. Davison called. Just wanted to check in, Alex. I have some news. Viridian Development just announced they're abandoning the Paradise Valley Resort project, citing unforeseen geological complications. I smiled. Geological complications. I like that. I thought you might, he said. He's gone, Alex. The threat is over. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of the creek, the wind in the pines. The war was over. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt right. This land, this life, it was never about the money buried beneath it. It was about the roots I was putting down into it. Home, I realized, isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. It's a choice you make every single day. a choice to stay, to fight, to care for something. It's the hard work, the repaired fences, the shared coffee with a neighbor. It's the decision to honor the past by building a future. My story started with an ending, the end of my time in the system. But it was really a beginning. It was the start of a life I chose, a life of meaning, forged from sacrifice and love. The scars are still there. The 13 years of loneliness don't just vanish, but they are a part of my story, not the whole story. They are the foundation upon which I'm building something new, something that will last. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a place you came from or a place you're trying to build? The truth is, most of us are rebuilding something. We're all trying to mend the broken fences of our own pasts. Share your story in the comments below. Let's build this community together, one story at a time. And if this meant something to you, if you believe in second chances and the power of fighting for your own narrative, then please subscribe. Because we all have a story worth telling, and we all deserve a place to call home.